This is part one of our attachment theory special, where we discuss different attachment styles, how they relate to cognitive development. Today, we're going to be discussing parental complexities. What role do they play in our environment? How do these complexities form? And does biological gender affect our response to it? So we're going to touch on each of these, but first, let's define what we're talking about. For those of you that don't know, parental complexity is the word that we use here at Real Life for what's commonly referred to as mommy or daddy issues. So before we jump into this, we need to make a quick discrepancy between issues and complexities. So when we use the term mommy issues or daddy issues, what we're really doing is referring to traits that people often exhibit as a result of issues with either the mother or the father figure. The issue here is that we're only discussing the correlation of traits and outcomes. If you go into Google and you search mommy issues, you're going to get a list of traits and different values that we have come to associate with people who experience these complexities. There's often very little discovery in terms of cognitive development and other factors that play a role in the way we process those emotions and those actions. So let's keep it simple. We're going to start with an operational definition of parental complexity. So over here, we define parental complexity as emotional or behavioral traits that come about as a result of conflicting parental engagement or the lack thereof. All right, so now that we have a definition, let's explore it a little bit, shall we? Now, like we've talked about in previous episodes, the way we form relationships and understand our environment is really driven by what we experience in those early years of our lives. Our brain can't store every bit of data that we process throughout the course of our lives. So early on, we go through a process called pruning, where we get rid of what's not important, and then we solidify what is important and what's imperative for our survival. So how does this play into the issue of parental complexity? Well, to examine that, we need to take a look at the pruning process and how it relates to how we perceive the world around us, okay? We know that our brains are hardwired to keep us safe and protected in our environment. So when we explore parental issues, we want to make sure that we're approaching that discovery process from a place that makes sense instead of just generalizing the information to fit the best criteria. It's easy for us to say biological males who have mommy issues are more prone to infidelity, for instance. But the big question is why? Why are they more prone to infidelity? This is where psychologists and psychiatrists and scholars all get caught in the weeds, and we start positing theories based on different drivers and all of these things. If it is a male, he acts this way. If it's a female, she acts this way. If it's an intersex individual, they act this way. The reality is that parental issues are quantifiable, and the implications apply to everyone across every level across the gender spectrum. And here's why. No matter who you are or where you come from, nearly every human being on Earth has a brain that is wired for self-preservation. Of course, there are outliers, neurological outliers, as there always will be because humans are complex creatures, but all you need to know is that keeping you alive is the main function of your brain. From the day you take that first breath until the day you take your last breath, your brain is constantly scanning the environment looking for threats and obstacles. As a child, your brain is doing this in a very rapid succession, one after the other, pow, 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 pow. So when you hear your parents fighting or you see violence in the home or you suffer any kind of assault, your brain picks up these nuances and indexes them for later use. When this happens as a result of the actions or behaviors of a parental figure or a person in a position of authority that we surround ourselves with on a day-to-day basis, what happens is that the nuances become more and more solidified. Think of it like your brain forming its own habits, okay? One of my favorite quotes is, what the eyes see and the ears hear, the mind believes. And when we're talking about the way we develop our coping mechanisms and defense responses, this is absolutely true. So, now that we understand how our brain analyzes the family dynamic, let's talk about the second step, which is the rationalization process. This is where biological sex comes into play, and we're going to talk about it. Our biological sex dictates the way our brain processes information. Biological females utilize a cross-communications method where the left and the right side of the brain communicate with one another. This gives females a very intuitive and kind of introspective view of their environment, right? They look inward. This is why women often make judgment calls based on their gut instinct rather than strictly through logic. Okay? It's a part of the intuitive process. The brains of biological males, on the other hand, utilize a linear communications method where the front and rear section of the brain talk to each other. This gives men a much more process-oriented and spatial view of the environment. This is why men often make judgment calls based on logical reasoning rather than strictly emotional response. It's a part of their reasoning process. Okay, that was a lot of information, so let's simplify. Biological women, so females, typically use experiential data or gut instinct to make judgment calls. Males tend to use logical data. These are two separate ways the brain processes information, left to right and front to back. So why does this matter? Well, because it gives us an insight into how our brains decide what is important and what is not in those early years. And like we talked about before, the way our brains process that environment largely dictates how we view the world and our behavioral response to it. So when it comes to parental complexity, we want to look at the way biological males and biological females interact with one another and the way that they process information. This is going to be pretty heavy on the behavioral science side, so bear with me because you're going to find a lot of value in this if you're willing to stick with it to the end. So going back to our example, let's look at the female to male authority dynamic. Biological females tend to internalize feelings when they're presented with conflict from a logical point of authority, like a father or a male boss. This happens because their brains are wired to solve issues in an intuitive, experiential way. It's a gut feeling, and the only way to process that is to take logic out of the equation and feel that emotion and come to terms with the emotion. This is why women with what they call daddy issues have trouble expressing themselves in a way that's non-tangible. The female brain understands that male authority is expressed with tangible results, and so they use tangible, results-based behavior to express how they feel. This often means taking actions that cause males to tangibly feel the way that she feels emotionally. The issue is that when a female is put in a position that forces her to bypass her own emotionally driven process, she begins to doubt her abilities and intuition. The spiral starts here because once a woman doubts her own abilities and intuition, she doesn't hold firm to boundaries, and in turn, she tends to underexpress her emotions in an effort to get her point across to him in a way that he understands. This is why women tend to internalize their emotions and withdraw from the issue. When you don't hold firm to your boundaries, you look to other people who have firm boundaries in place. And this is why women that have these issues often have an attraction to older men where they feel they're more established in life, they have stronger convictions, right? In addition to this, she may view these men as being more emotionally mature, which requires less logical processing, giving her more freedom to be in touch with her intuition and emotions. It's the path of least resistance, and at least in theory, it would be natural to assume by being with an older man, it would be less of an emotional toll on your intuitive processing. Now, on the other hand, looking at a male to female authority dynamic, biological males tend to externalize feelings when they're presented with conflict from an experiential point of authority, like a mother or a female boss. So this happens because the male brain is wired to solve issues in a logical and systematic way. It is a mental process for him, and the only way to do that is to take emotion out of the equation and use logical reasoning to come to terms with the issue. This is why men with what they call mommy issues have trouble expressing themselves in a way that's tangible. The male brain understands that female authority is expressed with emotion, and just like women, men do the opposite. And they often use emotional results-based behavior to express how they feel or their intentions. This can mean taking actions that cause the female to feel inside the way that he feels logically. Now, just like females, when a male is put in a position that forces him to bypass his own logical-driven process, he also begins to doubt his abilities and reasoning. Now, with men, when they doubt their abilities and reasoning, they feel out of control. And they often overexpress things emotionally in an effort to get their point across in a way that he feels that she would understand. This is where the random outbursts of anger, sadness, and irritability tend to come from. When men feel out of control, they will look to other people who need structure and control in their lives to feel more in control of his own. Okay, that's the difference. This is why men with these issues often have an attraction to women who they feel are more vulnerable or that need more guidance. Or on the other hand, he may be attracted to much older women who can provide him with the comfort and reassurance that he has a need for. In addition to this, men who fit the criteria often view these women as being more adaptable, which requires less emotional processing on his end, giving him more freedom to do what he does best, which in this case would be taking control and calling the shots. It's the path of least resistance, just like the last example, and at least in theory, it would be natural to assume that by being with either of these women, it would be less of an emotional toll on his logical processing. So there you have it. No matter if you have mommy or daddy issues, at the end of the day, you're a human being experiencing life in a way that makes sense to you. The good news is that no matter where you are in life and no matter what part of this giant complex spectrum you're on, those issues can be resolved with the right treatment and with the right coach. So if you or someone you know experiences parental complexity at any level, have them visit RealLifeAcademy.com today. Take the assessment. We provide it completely free of charge to anyone who signs up. It costs you absolutely nothing. We have a 24/7 coaching line where you can text with a licensed coach, completely free of charge, anytime, day or night. And whenever you're ready to take that next step, we have coaches on standby ready to help you work through the issues. So visit us today, see what your future has in store. Because listen, you're capable of incredible change, but it needs to start with you. My name is Marcus, and I want to thank you for taking the time to join me today for the podcast. We're going to see you on the next episode. Have a great